If you think about the role of chief people officers in the future, what are we really here to do? We're really here to uplift the employee experience because everything else can be copied. I'm thinking of it through that lens of what really uplifts the experience of the employee and how can it function as almost like their own first employee that is a bot that stays with them and helps them do their best work.
Yo, it's the future, don't hit the snooze. AI is here giving humans the boost. Team Humans rolling, brains in the game with Dan Turchin. Y'all remember the name. People reign in the mix, no stopping the flow. Better work, better life, yeah, we're ready to go. Robots and humans, a collab, you know. Okay, let's start the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work, episode 369. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. We have well over 1 million listeners, thanks to you who choose to tune in each week. I guess asked all the time how you can meet other listeners like yourselves, and the way to do it, subscribe to the newsletter. There's a link in the show notes. It includes some additional fun facts and some clips that don't always make it into the main episode. We are all in this together. My only ask, if you enjoyed today's conversation or any other, pay it forward. Tell just one friend you know about the podcast, and they will thank you. And they'll know that you value the future of humans and the future of work. And if someone you know shared this episode with you, tell them thanks, and of course, pay it forward. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode, like this one from Steve, who is a librarian in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Steve's favorite episode is number 294 with Bernard Marr, author and futurist, on how to use generative AI to get ahead in your career. That was a fun discussion. We will share the link in the show notes. We learn from AI Thought Leaders Weekly. Of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Here it is for today. When Amazon Web Services suffered an outage recently, it practically took down the internet with it. There went all of Amazon's services, from its shopping hub to its Ring doorbell cameras. The cause was blamed on a DNS resolution issue. DNS, or the domain name system, translates URLs, such as Amazon.com, into IP addresses, and it lets everything connect online until it's not available. If the phone numbers are outdated or wrong, then all of a sudden the internet breaks. Amazon suffered outages before, but the timing and impact of this one comes just months after a personnel decision by Amazon to reduce a lot of heads. In July, its cloud computing unit cut at least hundreds of jobs, following a warning from CEO Andy Jassy that the adoption of generative AI would lead to layoffs. If Amazon's relying on AI to pick up the slack in the wake of the layoffs, it could be a stunning example of how efforts to replace humans with unreliable AI tools and AI agents have backfired. Corey Quinn, who authors the Last Week in AWS newsletter, said, "You can hire a bunch of very smart people who will explain how DNS works at a deep technical level, but the one thing you can't hire is the person who remembers that when DNS starts getting wonky, check that seemingly unrelated system in the corner because it has historically played a contributing role to some outages in past years." It's a good read. It's an interesting, thought-provoking one. We'll share the full link. My commentary: expect more dissonance as customers and even displaced employees look to assign blame to AI that has seemingly replaced jobs. The counter-narrative, of course, is that AI is better at detecting and resolving outages than humans, who have limited recall. But as is always the case, the answer is more complicated. Here, a combination of human domain experts paired with machines fed trusted data with historical, from proven sources, would have likely led to the resolution of the DNS issue earlier. Expect smaller teams of experts collaborating with predictions and recommendations from AI to become the new dominant work paradigm. And as tech-driven apps and services continue to proliferate, expect the need for new human domain experts to more than compensate for reduced team size. If you're in a role that's easily automated, now's a good time to reskill and upskill. You have a unique opportunity to become a domain expert, and in the process, maybe turn toil into more meaningful higher paying work. Now, shifting to this week's great conversation, Kelly Jones is Chief People Officer at Cisco, the legendary tech company where she and her team own the people strategy for more than 86,000 employees. During her astonishingly long 18-year career at Cisco, she's built award-winning global teams that make Cisco a perennial best place to work. Kelly's career at Cisco began in talent acquisition, and she eventually was promoted to Senior Vice President and Global Head of Talent Solutions prior to her current role. Before Cisco, Kelly was Vice President of Sales Ops at Comsys. Kelly's the executive sponsor for Cisco's Connected Disability Action Network, Veterans Leadership Program, and Wellbeing Ambassador Program. Outside work, Kelly advances advocacy and leadership as a board member of the Children's Tumor Foundation and as a member of the Executive Women's Alliance. Kelly holds a Bachelor of Arts in Pre-Law from North Carolina State University. Go Wolfpack. And without further ado, Kelly, we've been waiting a while to have you on the podcast. It's my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Well, let's jump right in by having you share a bit more about your background and about the amazing journey you've been on at Cisco.
Right. Yeah, thanks for having me. It has been a long time. I'm glad that we're finally getting to do this. So, Cisco, I've been at Cisco for, I can't believe I'm about to say this out loud, but almost 20 years in April. And I'm on my 14th job actually at Cisco that I've had. And I've been able to build an interesting career here doing a lot of different things in the talent space. But I had a very non-traditional entrance into this role. And I think you know this, Dan, but I actually started out on the talent acquisition side, which is an atypical path really for CHROs. But I've been able to, throughout my career here, just say yes to a lot of interesting things and work in a lot of different areas, from business facing to practice work. So it's really just allowed me to do a lot of fun things at Cisco. But I wasn't going to be a CHRO when I started my career. I was actually going to be an attorney. So it was a little bit of a left turn for me.
You chose well.
Yeah.
Now, I had the pleasure of getting to meet you in person. And so I can tell all of our listeners that you just radiate warmth and humanness. And so when I see that Cisco is a perennial top of the great place to work charts, and congrats, I know recently as we're taping this, Cisco was again put at the top of that list. But I want our listeners to hear from you direct. I know how intentional it is. What makes Cisco a great place to work?
You know, I think the biggest thing is culture is really Cisco's operating system. And when we think about trying to drive a culture of innovation, innovation thrives when people feel like they're trusted, when they're included and they're supported. And so that's really what we try to focus on at Cisco. And we talk to people who leave and come back, or oftentimes people who leave and go somewhere else. There are a lot of great places you can choose to work, but there is something very unique that happens inside that system when it comes to trust and innovation that you don't find everywhere else. And so I think it makes us a really unique place to work from an employee experience standpoint.
I've heard you say, and I love this statement, I wish more CHROs would shout this from the top of the tallest mountain. Our currency is trust.
Yes.
What does that mean to you and to the people culture at Cisco?
I think trust is the most valuable thing that we hold with our customers, with our employees, with our partners. If you think about it, when you have trust, you can move fast and do big things within an organization. But if you think about the amount of disruption that's happening in the world right now, Dan, it's a very how do I phrase this? Right now things feel very uncertain. And so when you can give people a place where, you know, you're focusing on ensuring that you're communicating inclusively about what you're doing and why you make the decisions you make, because I think it's important that your employees might not always agree with every decision that you make, but being able to articulate the why and ensuring that your employees know that you're doing it with their best interest in mind, I think that's important. And that's really where the trust comes in. I think that bleeds into our customers a little bit as well. There's this saying out there, nobody's ever gotten fired for putting Cisco in, you know, because there's a lot of trust in the systems that we have. And I think it's the thing that we really strive to preserve with our employees, because it's so important, because we're trying to do big, hard things. And without trust, you're really nowhere.
Today, I would argue it's the most challenging time to be a people leader, because while AI is an imperative for lots of good reasons, it also threatens to violate trust that we've built up over years or decades with employees. How do you wrestle with that combination of introducing AI as hopefully an ally at work without making employees feel like it's an adversary and we're using it in ways that violate their trust?
Yeah, that's such a topical question. And I talked to so many other CHROs recently about this one. And I think the way we're coming from this is, AI isn't replacing human capability, it's amplifying it. We try to see it as an ally, ensuring that it helps all of our employees do their best work. And it's a team sport. We talk about it as a co-pilot, not a competitor. And I think what happens with that is the more people are using the systems and engaging with the systems, and when you empower your people to experiment with it safely, they start to see that, but it's going to take a little bit of time because there's a lot of fear of the unknown with us. And anyone that tells you exactly where we're going to be in 5 years is lying to you because no one really knows. It's moving so quickly. We're dealing with morning headlines. But I think when you empower your people to experiment safely and you have that culture of trust, the adoption becomes a lot easier and you get more excitement and less fear. And so we've tried to do a lot of really specific things to ensure that we bring our people into how we design this. Things with our teaming with AI pilot that we did. We invite our employees into this as we're designing it. And we're also incredibly clear about what we're doing with it. And that's something that I think is more and more companies come online, particularly with people data and how we think about what we're going to do with people data. We have to be very transparent about what we are and are not doing with this data. I think that also helps you build trust.
It's different to be a leader in this day and age, in part because every employee walks into every one-on-one with their very human manager, and they're burdened by the weight of uncertainty about the future of their career, their humanness at work, their colleagues. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's inevitable. It doesn't have anything to do with the Cisco culture, but you're in a position where you want to try to empower leaders to have these conversations and maybe be in roles that they haven't been in traditionally. Mm-hmm. How are you navigating that in terms of coaching people to be better leaders when every team member is a little bit apprehensive these days?
Yeah, it's such a powerful question because I think what you're getting at a little bit there too, Dan, is leaders set the tone. Leaders set the tone in so many of these things. And one of the most powerful things we can do is help people kind of trust themselves with where they're going. And one of the things that I've been talking a lot about recently is I actually think we're in a moment where leadership needs to evolve. Leadership is probably moved faster than any other thing I've seen over the last couple of years. And I've been thinking about leadership through this lens of what I would actually call the super leader. We had a fascinating debate on LinkedIn about should we give it that splashy of a name? Does it take away from what it is? But essentially, it's just recognizing that the leaders of the future are going to be able to balance this technology, being very savvy from a technology standpoint, with also being deeply human. So I've been talking about it kind of in these four categories. First is as the empath. We need leaders to be have a lot of empathy. And I believe that you can balance empathy with accountability in what's happening right now. And every company is in such a hyper growth mode. Those things can go together. There's a philosopher element to this that is really about, as we think about the adoption of AI, stopping to ask ourselves the question of just because you can do this thing doesn't mean you should. There's a lot of things you can do that may or may not make sense. So having the moment to stop and put an overlay of wisdom around how you're using the technology. And then there's the technologist, which is not meaning every leader has to have, a deep and wide subject matter expertise as a systems engineer. That isn't what I mean. But being enough well-versed on the technology to make good decisions about kind of systems and what you're doing with your organization. And then the last, and I think the one we don't talk about the most, is the change agent. Because if you ask anybody in any company now, what is the thing you're experiencing the most of? You're going to hear change. There's change all the time. And I think we're all getting comfortable with this fact that change is the new normal. And so leaders really own that. Leaders really own being change agents and having the right balance of kind of inspiration, aspiration, and plan to give their employees confidence that they're going in the right direction.
I love that article. I'm glad you published it. And I'm glad I saw that, it was so well received on social channels. So reminded me of a similar conversation we had recently with a mutual friend of ours on this podcast, Josh Burson, who espouses similar beliefs and is also, I think his message about empowering people has been well received. One of the challenges that I'd imagine you and your team faces is there's so many things that AI can do. And I love the way you said it. I say it frequently, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. But specifically with respect to deploying new AI use cases as part of the people experience. Just talk me
Mhm.
through how you vet the wide range of things you could do and figure out what things you should do with AI.
Yeah, that's a great question because we've gone through this as a lot of other organizations I'm sure have with their people team. And I think we started with close to 150 different use cases of things that we could do. And so when we're thinking about what makes the most sense to be able to put in place, I think there are probably three things that are top of mind for me. Number one is I think we have a really unique opportunity to not just make work easier for the people doing the work, which is important. But what's unique on the people side is if we can transform work and remove friction and give time back to the enterprise, that's almost 90,000 people that are getting time back. And so I'm prioritizing this a little bit looking through the lens of what are some of the things we can do that give time back to our employees and remove friction from the system. Things like we've had in place for a while now our PNC Assist tool, which allows our employees to interact with HR through Circuit. Circuit is our internal chat product, and so it allows our employees to essentially work through Circuit to do things like request days off, check and see what their balance is and different things. They can understand what are the days for me. We're doing days for me where we're still giving people an extra 4 days a year. They can interact with the system, and we're designing the system to actually be almost like an all-in people partner. So every single employee at Cisco has its own people partner that it's kind of at its fingertips. So we're focusing on things like that that are going to drive maximum impact for the enterprise. But then the second thing, from a really practical standpoint, when you're looking at these use cases, you always have to balance what is the biggest, if you think about the XY axis, the biggest impact with the least amount of disruption. Because we're trying to, if you think about it, use cases in the people team, they're one of many that are happening across Cisco right now, as you could imagine. And so how we prioritize these for our IT team and what we're going to work on first, looking at it through that axis of like impact versus like effort. I think it's a very practical way to really look at it. And then there's really a third part that is around what's going to dramatically uplift the employee experience. Because to me, I feel like that is the one thing, if you think about the role of chief people officers in the future, what are we really here to do? We're really here to uplift the employee experience because everything else can be copied. People can copy your benefits program, your tools, and they can buy other companies. Nobody can copy how it feels to work at a place, that emotional connection that you get to your workplace. And so I'm thinking of it the kind of third through that lens of what really uplifts the experience of the employee and how can it function as almost like their own first employee that is a bot that stays with them and helps them do their best work.
One of the things I find that the best leaders do today, particularly, are they're vulnerable and they're open to asking as many questions as they answer when it comes to how and why we use AI. And I love the kind of metrics and the process that you use to evaluate new AI use cases.
Yeah.
It would help a lot of our listeners to maybe hear you say an example of, to the extent one exists, maybe an AI initiative or something you thought would work that would uplift employees and maybe didn't work out as you expected. Any learning you can share?
Oh gosh. Let me see. I mean, there's so many things that we started with and didn't end up with, mostly just from the standpoints of prioritizing. But I can tell you one idea that I actually was pretty excited about, and then we realized it was slightly different than what we thought, and that would be onboarding. Onboarding is a complex process with a company the size of Cisco because you have systems and tools. You've got your typical benefits things that you do, but then you have your functional onboarding. So if you're going to work in sales, it's going to be a little bit different than what you do in engineering. And when we started this, we had this idea of, should we have an onboarding bot that actually is kind of your companion when you're coming onto Cisco? And then what we realized pretty quickly was it's a little limiting. If you just have an onboarding bot that kind of, as you start, helps guide you to all the things, yes, it's efficient, but what it doesn't do is kind of take you through that whole life cycle as an employee. So we kind of took our use case around that to say, it's not really onboarding, it's the entire employee experience. But we had some other ones that we looked at that I don't know are going to make it through to the end. And some of it too is your data readiness. This is the big thing about these use cases. You have to be really honest about where you are with your data readiness. And this is the thing that when we started some of this early. I knew this intellectually, but I didn't feel it emotionally. And what I mean by that is It's a lot of work when you have a big data warehouse. You're a company like us that's been around for a long time. There's a lot of information out there. So even just like cleaning up the policies to be able to respond to these really basic questions, we have to take a keen look to understand where is the data ready and where is it not. And there were a few areas too where we were thinking this will be great, but the data is not ready, and it's going to take us a long time to get the data ready to do it. So we had more than one when we think about like what went through and what didn't. But it's a process. I will say this, Dan, we're not perfect at what we're doing in this, but we're trying to do it with a keen eye towards the employee experience and making sure we're kind of uplifting the enterprise. But yeah, we had a couple that didn't make it through.
Along those lines of data readiness, we talk a lot on this podcast about exercising AI responsibly.
Mm-hmm.
And it means different things to different people. Certainly at an organization of Cisco scale and in your role, I'd be particularly interested in knowing what that means to you, whether it's from a data perspective or latent bias, or what decisions is it okay to have AI make on behalf of employees? How do you think about responsible use of AI?
I think there's a few things. I think the biggest thing is, we're a global company and we do business in countries all over the world. And so we start with, respecting the law. I know that sounds very basic, but the data privacy laws are very different around the world. So we don't ever wade into an area that is going to create conflict for our employees or conflict for us in any market. So starting there, data privacy is kind of critical for us. The second thing I would say is we have an AI governance board that is designed essentially all of our decisions that we're doing to ensure that they're responsible. And it's a team of senior leaders that does review kind of everything that ultimately goes through at Cisco. So we want to make sure that we get the right level of eyes on it. We have a huge focus on data transparency. And this is interesting learning for us. One of the things we do in PNC is our people and communities team. It's what we call our HR team. One of the things that we do in PNC is we oftentimes test things out before we take them to the rest of the enterprise to make sure we learn whatever worked, whatever didn't work. How do we sharpen it so that when we take it to other business leaders, it's ready to go? And so in doing that, we learned early on that when it comes to using people's data, we piloted PNC Assist in our PNC team first. And as part of that, we had to ask our people team to agree to use their data to answer the questions. It's things like, if I ask a question about, what my contributions are in my 401k, I have to give Cisco permission to query that and give me that data. And so, it's the data permission piece. And something we learned was only about half our team said yes to start with, because we weren't clear enough about here's what we're doing with the data and here's what we're not doing. And so when we went to kind of enterprise launch, we were really clear about it. So that second part being just deep clarity about what it is that you're doing with the data. And then I think the third thing is, employees have a lot of questions. We run an all company meeting. We call it the Cisco Beat. We get a lot of questions about this. We have in the adoption curve, as you could imagine, we're probably a little bit more mature. Most tech companies are a little bit more mature in the adoption side, but we still have some cynics. We still have some people that are unsure and not really comfortable, and they feel very comfortable voicing that. And so we try to give people an opportunity to talk about their concerns, and we address those concerns and answer those questions. I think transparency is just a huge piece of it. But the other thing that I'll just add into this that we learned from our AI study, so we did this kind of far-reaching AI study with our employees to understand early on kind of how they were feeling about it. We learned that leaders were really the key to adoption. Employees are 2 times more likely to use it if their direct leader uses it. So we've said to the leaders, have these conversations with your teams, model what you're doing. I talk to my function about what I'm doing. I use it every single day. And I talk to my function about different ways that I use it just to get them comfortable. So I think it's a lot of things, but the transparency is a big part of it.
So let's say Kelly and Dan are having a version of this conversation and it's 2030 instead of 2025. How does the global organization that is Cisco look different? How do teams interact differently? Are there new jobs? Are there different jobs? What's your vision looking 5 years out?
It's interesting. I think I just said at the top, if anyone tells you they know exactly, they're lying to you. So I'll give you my today, and then 5 years from now, Dan, we can sit down and listen to this and see how close was I. But I actually think that yes, it is changing jobs. It is changing work. It is in many ways probably going to change the structure of work within many companies. And what I would like to do is ensure that anything that we have in my part of the organization that is deeply administrative is done primarily with the machine, and anything that needs the human overlay is done with humans. And I know that sounds very basic, but that's essentially where it is that we're going. And I believe that this is going to unlock us. If AI gives us time back, we're going to use that time to connect and to create and hopefully to lead better. That's really the thing that I'm leaning into. People leadership is hard. You need time to do it. And so imagine a world in which you're a people leader and say you're doing a performance review. Rather than coming in and sitting down and kind of getting out of your head the last 6 months, how has Kelly been doing? What do you need to say about her performance? Which is fraught with recency bias, which is fraught with all types of unconscious bias. How great would it be if you actually had something that came to you and said, by the way, this is kind of what you asked Kelly to do. This is how Kelly's performed on these things. And here are some of the other factors that we see that show really high engagement and performance with Kelly. We recommend that in your review, you focus in on these things. And so then the power is in the conversation. So when I say more human connections, people are kind of saying that all the time. What does that mean? That means you have the power to actually sit down and have the conversation versus the hour that it takes you to either fill out your performance review or administer it, if that makes sense. Because historically, doing your performance review as an employee is like doing your taxes. It's that dreaded thing you sit down and do, and it's, I have to pull all this stuff up. So if we can take all of that away and through automation and allowing them to track the work they're doing, be able to very quickly align to what is the impact that I've driven, over the last 6 months, what are the achievements that I have, then the goodness is in the conversation, and that's the human part. So I think 5 years from now, we're going to be in this moment where the future of work is not less human, it's more human, it's just powered by AI. So I think we're going to be having more conversations, we're going to be creating more, and we're going to have a lot of what is more administrative, automated.
I hope that's the future that we're talking about in 5 years. That's certainly consistent with my beliefs. What is Cisco's approach or your belief about upskilling and reskilling opportunities, given that the nature of the workforce is going to change?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one. And we've been really transparent. I think AI is going to change work, but it doesn't always eliminate it. And for us, it's actually creating some new opportunities and some new skills. And so the learning piece is huge. We've been focusing on a couple different areas. Like a lot of companies, we've been doing AI training for the whole organization. In some ways, we're doing it for specific roles where we know the roles are changing. Our focus is really on this human-centered automation where AI is going to handle the repetitive so humans can focus on the creative. So then how do we upskill humans on the creative part? We know from, I'm sure you've read it, Dan, I think we might have talked about it, or I might be confusing the streams on the conversation, but do we have a conversation about the WEF report and
we did.
things?
Yeah, we did.
That's right.
Good memory.
That was one of the ones that was talking about creativity and empathy and all these things that, oftentimes people feel like they don't have time to do because there's so much in front of us with our work. And this is the uplift on the well-being side that we don't always talk about, is if we can remove some of the drudgery, work can actually be a source of well-being. When you're aligned and working in flow with your skills and you enjoy what it is that you're doing and you're contributing value and you can see that, it actually is an uplift for well-being. So, but back to your question about skills, I think there's a huge part on this because we have a pretty large enterprise. We've got 84,600 and some employees, give or take, depending on what day it is. That is a huge amount of people when you think about it in terms of human potential to be able to reskill into these jobs. So we recently rethought our entire learning ecosystem. We brought someone on new to kind of revamp it, and that's a large part of what they're focused on.
Kelly, out of respect for your time, I know you have a hard stop, but I have to get in one last question before I can let you off the hot seat. Is that okay?
Yeah, I love the hot seat.
Okay. Well, I love talking to Kelly the human because I really I celebrate who you are and how you lead, the great people culture there. And I've got to ask, it's a tough job that you have. Everyone's problem is your problem. And yet, you manage to, find the inner strength, get up every morning and be the Kelly that everyone expects you to be. I happen to know that you and I are both students of Stoicism, and we shared common philosophies on how we bring our best selves to work. Just talk us through maybe kind of the Kelly Jones operating system. How do you manage to do what you do?
Oh gosh, I'm glad you mentioned Stoicism because if you hadn't, I probably would have, because that was my during the pandemic, that really became a big part of how I start my day. And how I try to live my life. Because if you think about this role and what Stoicism gives to it, it's all about focusing on what you can control and influence, understanding there are things that you can't, and that's hard for people on a people team because we really want to fix everything. We really want to do everything, but really being grounded in where you can kind of drive influence. Ensuring that you are starting every day with focusing on good character. That's the Marcus Aurelius piece, like acts of good character. And, how do you kind of stay grounded in that? But for me, Dan, I'm an optimistic person kind of by nature. So this one for me, it never is lost on me how fortunate I am to have this job, to be able to do this role. And I impact 84,000 people and their families. And so by default, that's a lot larger. And so it's a really good way to invest your life. So I think my short answer to that is probably gratitude. I have so much gratitude for Cisco, for the ability to do this job, and for the team that I do this job with. It makes the harder times easier, because what we do is important and it's meaningful. And I think sometimes people that do this work can forget that, getting so bogged down. But what we do matters. It matters to people. It impacts their families, their lives, and it matters. And that's what keeps me grounded.
Great answer. And feels like we did this one at double speed. We covered a lot. And I hope you'll take me up on the offer. Come back and continue the conversation. I really, really have been looking forward to this one and didn't disappoint.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, it's a fortunate moment. I talk a little fast, Dan, and usually I try to slow it down. And since we didn't have a lot of time, I didn't modulate. So if you need to replay this on 0.75, just let me know.
Well, you never got to be that lawyer. So instead, you can talk at double speed and pretend you're a lawyer.
There you go.
Brilliant. Well, that's the amazing Kelly Jones from Cisco. And that is, in fact, all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.
Yo, it's the end of the show, time to power it down. AI's the sis, but humans wear the crown. Team Human in the house, got the vibe so clever. Dan Turchin from People Rain, making us better.
We learned about AI for humans. We're ready to conquer the future, that's all for now.
See you next time.